This presentation highlights some of the key points in the book Creativity, Inc., Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. We are reading this book because of its focus on creativity and innovation from a strategic management perspective. Ed Catmull's main concern was not whether Pixar would succeed, but that Pixar might fail after succeeding. He was very concerned about building an organization that would sustain itself and thus provide a purposeful and worthwhile experience for him and his long-term employees. Because of the industry in which he operates, the thesis of his work is creativity and what it takes to develop and protect that creative process to achieve desired goals. His presumption is that many companies stifle talent and don't even know that they're doing it. So he tries to identify those kinds of problems and ways to fix those. He concludes that managers must give their employees the freedom to experiment and explore. They must loosen controls as opposed to tightening them. They must accept risk and trust the people that they work with. So he emphasizes that job titles and organizational hierarchies are not important to the creative process, and in fact can hamper it. We need to realize that creative people seek to determine what is actually real as opposed to what we believe in our heads, which, as you may already realize, is a common human bias. We are predisposed to believing things we think we know as opposed to examining the reality around us. Finally, he emphasizes that collaboration between people is essential to excellence. We can't do this alone. We also need to take a step back and look at the processes at Pixar. They encountered the need to develop new processes and technology to accomplish their goal. Just like the Apollo moon missions, they did not know how to do this, they had to learn to do it. So Catmull challenges us to get smarter about what we're trying to do. He is not the first person to say this, but basically you want to hire people that are smarter than you. Thus your goal, as odd as it seems, is to become the dumbest person in the organization. He shares the story of interviewing for a job and being asked what other people should be considered for that position. That's a very novel idea. It tells you that you should be apprised of the industry in which you work to the point where you would know the kinds of people who would do such jobs well. So it's about good ideas, but also very much about the people who can support those ideas. At Pixar, artistry and polish didn't matter if they were not getting the story right. Ask yourself, in other types of businesses, what is analogous to the story? Or perhaps we could say, what is the product that we're concerned about? Finally, in this section on page 42, he shares the story about Bill Joy and Steve Jobs interacting, with each thinking that the other person was arrogant. He opens chapter 3 with the statement that ignorance plus a driving need to succeed equates to rapid learning. This is analogous to saying that you will do what you are motivated to do. On page 51 appears my favorite statement in the entire book, when Ed Catmull states, "You don't have to ask permission to take responsibility." Wow, that statement pretty much captures the essence of leadership. Can you imagine what organizations would be like, as well as our society, if people adopted that mantra? Some years ago, I was teaching a leadership class, and a woman in the class shared the following story. As a girl at age 12, she was riding with her grandfather in his pickup truck through a rural area of South Carolina. They came across a tree which had been blown down by a storm. The tree was blocking the road, so they had to stop. She said, "Somebody needs to move that tree." The grandfather turned to her and said, "You're somebody." Mother Teresa is quoted as saying, "Do not wait for leaders. Do it alone, person to person." What a lesson. Catmull mentions the issue of assembling your parachute before jumping out of a plane. Think back to Carl Weick's story about the lost army patrol in the Alps. When you're in free fall, lost, or otherwise in some trouble, any old strategy will do. Things did not always go completely well at Pixar. At one point, they discovered that some employees felt marginalized and that the good things that were happening were hiding the bad things. His statement that looking for problems was not the same as seeing them is insightful. They also concluded that they were confusing the communication structure with the organizational structure, which hampered the best way to operate. They thought they had a good process at Pixar, which they could trust, but eventually Catmull concludes that it was more important to trust people as opposed to the process. It is important to have the right group in place which can solve problems through collaboration. At Pixar, they called it the brain trust. He also shares some candid comments about teams. A poor team will fail, even with good resources and ideas, but a good team will fix problems regardless of the challenges they face. He concludes that people are more valuable than ideas simply because ideas come from people. So the wisdom is to find, develop, and support good people. In management, we talk a lot about efficiency. Catmull clarifies for us the idea that efficiency is a goal, but quality is the goal. As we consider great companies in books like Great by Choice, the long-term 20-mile march to achieve quality and consistency of operations over time produces outstanding outcomes like that found at Pixar. We live in a participation trophy society where people expect accolades simply for showing up. So page 80 has another insightful statement. To ensure quality, excellence must be an earned word, attributed by others to you, not proclaimed by you about yourself. Well, contrast that with some of what we see in the world around us. In the spirit of being candid, how many universities do not have some sort of U.S. News and World Report ranking right now? As the Jim Collins Good to Great series points out, companies can exist even if they're not great, but it's the best companies that focus on the idea that quality is their greatest asset. That quality is the business. I just mentioned the issue of honesty and candor. As you're likely aware, USC Aiken has been ranked number 1 14 times in its academic category. But similarly, when I was at the Citadel for 6 years, the Citadel was also ranked number 1 in some category. So what does it all mean? What is it that you need to do to build a really great organization like Pixar? I don't think the answer has changed over time. Years ago, I was reading a marketing book which focused upon Disney and Disney's success. One of the statements in the book was, be like Disney. So if you want to be great, be like Pixar or any of the other great companies out there. Because they are in a profit-making business, the market decides how great they are. To become great, one must take risks. Otherwise, everyone would be great. In doing so, we face the fear of failure, and it is important to ask ourselves, what happens when we're afraid to fail? Feeding the beast and the ugly baby conveys that ultimately big bills have to be paid in big organizations. And ultimately, things change. The discussion of the hidden is both interesting and important. You can't know what you don't know, but you should be prepared by readying yourself for the unexpected. He also dismisses the convention that hindsight is 20/20 by conveying the insight that hindsight can distort our views. The past should be our teacher, not our master. The dailies are very insightful processes as well. It begs the question, how candid are we willing to be with each other in order to truly solve problems and produce great solutions? The whole idea of creativity highlights the notion that ideas are not waiting to be picked from trees. Ideas must be developed and processes must exist to allow that development to occur. Disney Animation found itself in a 16-year rut, which is almost hard to believe after their success in the early 1990s. But it is the case that 16 years went by and Disney was seemingly resting on its laurels with no new #1 movies. Ed Catmull and his group immediately changed the physical environment at Disney to remove obstacles to future success. And as you're aware, the movie Frozen eventually came out of Disney as the #1 animated movie of all time at that point in time, grossing $1 billion worldwide. Catmull concludes that doing all of the things he talks about will not necessarily make the job of managing the creative culture easier. But ease isn't the goal. Excellence is. The book ends with reflections on Steve Jobs that reflect well on Steve. And on pages 315 to 319, there is a summary which can serve you in the future as a quick reference and resource.